Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for...
It's the Real Jonathan Smith Show on Indy's Sports Ticket, 1430 AM and 99.5 HD2.
What's going on? It's the Real Jonathan Smith Show here on Indy's Sports Ticket. Hopefully you're having a nice week. It is a dreary Wednesday. I hate the rain. I hate the cold. It's all bad. It's all bad, but that's okay because the college football playoff rankings came out last night, and the Indiana Hoosiers are ranked 5th. If the playoffs started today, they'd be the 7th seed, and they would host the 10th seeded Ole Miss Rebels. Yeah, I mean, Indiana's in the right spot. They're ranked 5th. I obviously have some issues with the ranking, as does everybody else who tunes in and watches this and likes and enjoys college football. But I don't like to start my shows off with stupidity, but today I feel like I have to. Because during the college football playoff show last night, I heard the dumbest thing I think I've ever heard anyone say in the world of sports. Like, legitimately. Joey Galloway suggested for Indiana to not play Curtis Rourke on Saturday against Ohio State. Here's Joey Galloway being an idiot.
They can't go any higher.
They are behind a one-loss team.
They have a chance to go on the road and prove what they are. Now, honestly, if we believe in what our metrics are saying, if I'm Indiana, I don't know if I'm playing Rourke against Ohio State. We've seen what happened to Florida State last year, Jordan Travis. What could keep Indiana out of this? Getting their quarterback hurt. We've seen it happen to Florida State last year, having not played anybody.
Or losing by 30.
If you look at 3, 4, and 5, Texas, Penn State, and Indiana, they literally have played nobody between all 3 teams. The toughest team in that is Vandy. So a lot of this that we're looking at is eye test.
Oh my gosh. That is Joey Galloway of ESPN right there, saying that Indiana shouldn't play Curtis Rourke on Saturday. Every time I hear it, I'm dumbfounded because that's just an incredible thing to say. Let's just start with this. Indiana is not going to sit out Curtis Rourke in this game because if they win, which they're more than capable of doing, then they're in the playoff and they're likely playing against Oregon in the Big Ten championship games. Amidst all of the idiotic things that I have heard said about Indiana over this past week, right? Over all the SEC fans who don't like Indiana because they haven't watched Indiana play, and because their name's Indiana, they just kind of assume that they aren't very good, even though if they sat down and they watched Indiana play, they would very quickly realize how good this Indiana football team is. And what Joey Galloway just said, though, it's got to be the dumbest take all year. It's terrible. That's awful. Anyway, Indiana, they're ranked 5th in the latest edition of the college football playoff rankings. That they would be the 7th seed if the playoffs started today. They didn't move up or down in the rankings. This is also where I would have them ranked. Okay, like I think they are very much deserving of being the 5th ranked team in the country. And if they win on Saturday, they'll likely be the 2nd ranked team in the country. So hopefully they can pull off that win. And, over the past week, there have been a lot of conversations dogging Indiana for their schedule, which is terrible. Okay. They haven't played anybody good. Their best win's Washington. Okay. Like that's it. But here's the thing that the Indiana haters need to understand. They are winning their games by an average of 30 points per game. If you sit down on Saturday and you watch the Hoosiers play, then they clearly deserve to be ranked 5th in the country. It is important to watch the games. If you hear someone say that Indiana doesn't deserve to be ranked 5th, or if you hear that Indiana isn't very good, or if you hear anything like that, just very simply ask that person how many games they've seen Indiana play. The answer won't be more than 3. Okay, when someone says that Indiana doesn't deserve a college football playoff bid, whether they beat Ohio State or not, they're very simply telling you that they haven't watched the games. Because either way, no matter what happens on Saturday, Indiana deserves to be in the college football playoff, whether they beat Ohio State, whether they lose to Ohio State by 3, or whether they lose by 50. More on that here in a couple of minutes, results shouldn't matter, right? Like we have this argument every single year in the world of college football when we talk about rankings, right? Like when we get to this part of the year, there's the people who argue that record is what really matters because winning matters, and it should, and losing matters, right? And then you've got, the other side of things where it's like who you play should matter, which is also true, right? Like Georgia, Alabama, Ole Miss, Tennessee, and Texas A&M all have a fair gripe with how scheduling is played out in the SEC this year versus the Big Ten. Okay? Because, look, the Indiana schedule. It's not very good. The Penn State schedule. It's not very good. Meanwhile, you look at teams like Georgia who had to play at Alabama and at Ole Miss, and they had to play Tennessee at home, and like they've had to play tougher opponents, and like that should also be taken into the equation. But the one thing that we can all do, no matter what the schedule is, no matter what the record is we can all sit down on Saturdays and we can watch every single team play. We can watch Indiana play no matter how easy or hard the schedule is. Same goes for Georgia and Alabama and Tennessee and Texas A&M and so on. Okay, what do those teams look like when they're at their best? What do those teams look like when they're at their worst? What do those teams look like when they're playing at a pretty medium level? What do those teams look like? Like, we can answer that question for every team, regardless of schedule or record. This is why the eye test is important. It's the one thing that we can apply to every single team, no matter the record, the schedule, or the name bias. You can sit down on Saturdays and watch how teams play. And if you've watched Indiana play football, then you know that despite the schedule, that the Indiana Hoosiers look like one of the 12 best teams in the country. Okay? You know that the Indiana Hoosiers are more than deserving of a college football playoff spot, whether they win on Saturday or not. Right? The other thing, when it comes to just looking ahead to Saturday, Indiana taking on the Ohio State Buckeyes on the road, I still can't wait to watch that game. I think it's going to be absolutely fascinating to see how that goes. The precedent has been set for no matter what happens to Indiana on Saturday, that they should get a spot in the college football playoff, whether they win, lose by 3, lose by 50, whatever it is. Because Penn State is ranked 4th with a similar schedule to Indiana, despite losing to Ohio State. And once again, I feel like I say this every time I talk about the college football playoff rankings. If you watch that game, you know that Penn State and Ohio State are miles apart. The 20-13 final score doesn't fully show how dominant Ohio State was in that game, despite Ohio State playing one of their worst games of the year. Okay, so the precedent has been set that if you lose to Ohio State, it's like the game doesn't matter. Okay, and then on top of that, Notre Dame is ranked 6th. They're ranked 6th. Their schedule, not that great. Sorry. Your best wins, Navy. Love the troops. Very much, I support the troops, okay? But their best wins, Navy. And they lost to Northern Illinois at home. If Notre Dame can be ranked 6th with their best win being Navy, and having the worst loss in the country, because that's what that Northern Illinois loss is. It is the worst loss in the country, at least amidst the teams that are competing for playoff spots. If they can be ranked 6th with a crappy schedule, and once again, the worst loss in the country, then Indiana should get a spot regardless of what happens on Saturday, whether they win, lose by 3, or lose by 50. Okay, it is not that difficult. Everyone should be treated the same, but we know that's not going to happen because Indiana's name just isn't quite as sexy as Notre Dame's and Penn State's, and it's frustrating. So I really hope Indiana goes out there and they beat Ohio State on Saturday because they are more than deserving of a college football playoff spot. Okay. And speaking of watching the games, it's what I do on Saturdays. I'm sitting down in front of my TV and I'm watching the games, right? Because that's how you know who's good and who isn't. And it's also how I know who to include on this new segment that we have here on the Real Jonathan Smith Show called Fraud Watch. Fraud Watch. I've got 3 teams on the list this week that I think are potentially frauds. Penn State, obviously. I have no evidence about Penn State being a fraud other than the fact that I have sat down and watched them play. I watched Ohio State put together one of their worst performances of the season and still beat them by a touchdown. I sat back and I watched them barely beat Bowling Green. I sat back and I watched them barely beat Illinois. I saw them have to come back from down double digits against USC. Please watch Penn State play and try to disagree with me. Watch that pathetic offense play and try to disagree with me. If you sit down and you watch them or go back and watch their games from earlier in the season, I fully believe that you will be on the same page as me and say there's no way that team is the 4th best team in the country. Now, if you wanted to argue and say, Jonathan, they're 9-1 in the Big Ten, they should probably be a top 12 team. Okay, fine, whatever. But they're not the 4th best team. They're not the 4th best team in the country. I really wish Indiana played Penn State this year because I think Indiana would dog Penn State. Penn State is not a good football team. They are fraudulent and they do not deserve to be ranked 4th in the country. Next here on the next team I have here on Fraud Watch, Miami. Miami's the opposite of Penn State. Where I trust Penn State's defense because I've watched that unit and there's NFL guys. It's a really good unit. They get after the passer. I like their DBs. I just don't trust that Penn State offense. Miami, total opposite. That offense is electric. Cam Ward might be the best quarterback in the country. I don't think he is. I think it's Shitter Sanders, but Cam Ward's really good at football. That defense, though, was horrendous. It is no good. And Cam Ward has bailed them out time and time again. That's why they only have 1 loss. But they really should have more than 1 loss. Okay, their schedule hasn't been tough. Their best win's Louisville, who's 6-4. Come on now. They should have lost to Virginia Tech. They had the Hail Mary overturned. Shouldn't have been overturned. There's no way that the video evidence on that was conclusive. They lost to they should have lost to Cal, right? You know, they came storming back. They were down by 30, whatever. And then once again, the replay center bails out Miami for not calling a blatant targeting call. Once again, Miami's best win's Louisville. They only beat them by 7. They just lost to an average Georgia Tech team. Why is this team ranked 8th? Why are they ranked in front of SMU? Doesn't make any sense because, let me say it again, if you go back and you watch the games, SMU is better than Miami. There's just no other way to really put it. Next is Boise State, last team I have here on Fraud Watch this week. I know Boise State has Ashton Jeanty. I know he's awesome. I'm just not convinced that they're the 12th best team in the country. And honestly, the idea of Boise State getting a bye upsets me. It just does. Like, I get it. They played Oregon tough, but that was 2.5 months ago. Like, Oregon's gotten a lot better since then. I don't think that Boise State has. Okay, Boise State barely beat UNLV. They barely beat Nevada. If you're a non-Power 4 school, for me at least, like, you better blow out everyone in your conference for me to believe in you. And Boise State just hasn't done that. So, like, they have to be on the fraud watch list. The last thing that I want to hit on here with the college football playoff rankings, and then we're gonna go to break, and I'm gonna bring in Jared Dubin, a guy who covers the NFL and the NBA. He does a fantastic job covering both over at CBSSports.com. He's going to join. We're going to talk a little basketball and a little bit of NFL stuff as well. The most frustrating thing, though, about last night for me in these rankings is BYU falling 8 spots. if one loss is going to make you fall from 6th in the country all the way down to 14th, you never should have been ranked 6th in the first place. Okay? Like the College Football Playoff Committee clearly didn't think that BYU was one of the 12 best teams in the country if one loss is going to plummet them that far. They clearly didn't think that BYU was the 6th best team in the country if one loss is going to plummet them that far. It's like, oh, well, Jonathan, they lost to Kansas. Yeah, Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois, and they're still ranked 6th. That is by far a worse loss than what BYU endured on Sunday. They also have, I would argue, better wins than Notre Dame does. For example, they've beaten SMU. So I just wish there was some sort of consistency from the committee. Is it eye test? Is it resume? Is it just record? Like what is the criteria? Because it doesn't feel like they're just ranking the best teams. It doesn't feel like they're ranking entirely off record or resume or strength of schedule or anything like that. It feels like they're just kind of throwing a list together and saying, all right, guys, hopefully you like it. And that, for me at least, is very frustrating. When we come back here in 4 minutes, Jared Dubin of CBS Sports, he's going to join the show. We're going to talk a little bit of Colts. We're going to talk a little bit of basketball storylines. 76ers, interesting things are happening. Going to get his thoughts on Tyrese Halliburton. We're going to talk about the Colts making the playoffs. Other, NFL storylines happening as well. That's all coming your way here in about 4 minutes.
Often imitated, never duplicated. It's the real Jonathan Smith Show on Indy Sports Tickets, 1430 AM and 99.5 HD2.
What's going on? It's the real Jonathan Smith Show here on Indy Sports Ticket. Hopefully you're having a nice week. Jared Dubin of CBS Sports joins me now. We're going to talk a little NFL and NBA storylines. Jared, what's going on, man?
Not too much. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well. Indiana ranked 5th last night. I don't know if you're a college football fan or not, but I love it. I love seeing Indiana ranked 5th. It's great for me in my show, so I can't really complain.
My brother went to Indiana, and I went to Miami, and this is the first time Indiana's been ranked higher than Miami probably in the history of the two schools. So we got a little bit of a rivalry going on right now.
That's funny. Yeah, that's great. Miami, I just really quickly, but before we talk Colts and the NBA stuff, I want to get to. Do you think Miami's the 8th best team in the country?
I think we have the best quarterback in the country, and that's really what matters.
Fair enough.
Cam Ward can score on pretty much anyone at any time, and if the defense wasn't such a tire fire, then yeah, it could be a top 5, top 6 team in the country. Just sort of matters what defense shows up in any given week. Yeah,
that's from watching them. That's kind of my impression as well. Speaking of quarterbacks, and that being really the only thing that matters, we talked before the season started. You were pretty hopeful for Anthony Richardson, in part because he was playing for Shane Steichen and all the talent, which they obviously win on Sunday. Anthony Richardson was incredible, the best performance of his career by far. What did you think of his performance on Sunday?
Yeah, I mean, I think you said it. Best performance of his career. He was hitting the easy stuff, and he was hitting, the stuff that really only guys like him can hit deep down the field. I think that hitting the easy stuff is the big thing for him because we know he could do outrageous things with the ball in his hands, whether on the run or with deep throws down the field. It's a matter of consistently hitting on the underneath and scheme stuff that Steichen puts out there in front of him. And when you do that, you can move the ball just so much better than they're able to when he's, firing scattershot all over the place.
Yeah, I totally agree. Did you think that he looked more relaxed? Like, I'm not a big look. Like, I've never played quarterback in the NFL or anything like that. Obviously, wouldn't be here if it did. But I don't know. He just seemed calmer and more relaxed. Did you kind of get the same feeling watching him on Sunday?
I think so. I mean, I think that his footwork certainly was better. That's going to be the big thing with him going forward, I think, because if you're, quarterback coaches and coordinators and people that watch film all the time talk about, like, if your feet are not right, you're not going to throw the ball well. There are obviously exceptions to that rule, like Patrick Mahomes, and that's basically just about it. Everybody else, you got to have the footwork down right or you're not going to be able to get the ball where you want it to go. And I thought that was better for him. I think also the Jets defense has just not been as good this year as we've seen in years past. But it's not like earlier in the season he was facing exclusively really good defenses and struggling because of that. There obviously were some good defenses that he played. But, down the stretch of the year, there are some more tough defenses. They got the Patriots, they got the Broncos, they got the Titans defense has been pretty good throughout this season. Even if it's been a little bit worse against the passing, against the run. So there are still some tough tests coming for him. But, I said before the season I have confidence in Steichen. I still do. Obviously, Richardson has an extreme level of talent, the likes of which have rarely been seen. And it's just sort of a matter of tapping into the right things at the right times and being more consistent.
Without a doubt, joined by Jared Dubin, who covers the NFL over at CBSSports.com. He also covers basketball on his own time at Last Night in Basketball.com. Make sure you go and check out all of his stuff. The Colts are 5-6 right now. Probably going to be 5-7 after playing the Lions on Sunday. What do you think their chances are of making the playoffs in what seems to be a crowded AFC wildcard race?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends. It's basically like them, Denver, and what I guess, like, if the Dolphins win or the Bengals win out, like, those are the other teams sort of competing for the 7 spot at this point, unless you think the Ravens are going to lose a bunch more games that they shouldn't. I'd have to look at Denver's schedule down the stretch. looks pretty easy coming up the next couple of weeks with the Raiders and Browns. But, they got the Chargers, Bengals, Chiefs in the final 3 weeks of the season after that game against the Colts. I feel like that was that week 14 game
That sounds
against
right.
the Colts is
Yeah.
going to go a long way toward determining which of them gets that spot.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, and games like that are always awesome, just because everyone obviously knows what's on the line and how important those games are. What have you made of the Broncos as of late? Bo Nix is really surging. You mentioned earlier that defense is really good. What do you kind of think of the Broncos?
Yeah, I mean, the defense has played really well, basically, except for the one game against the Ravens where they just absolutely did whatever they wanted. But, Lamar Jackson's going to do that to you every once in a while. Throughout the rest of the season, I think they've only let up more than 20 points, like one other time or something like that. When you have an elite unit like that, you're always going to have a pretty good baseline for success. And, you saw against the Falcons when Bo Nix has, all the time in the world, there's, a pretty decent ceiling there. The offensive line has been very good throughout the season, but it's a matter of getting Nix to sort of push the ball downfield a little bit more. Granted, a lot of the work they did against the Falcons was actually after the catch. I think he had like an average depth of throw that was below 5 yards in that game and still threw for over 304 touchdowns. So that's something that's not necessarily always going to happen. But, Sean Payton, like Shane Steichen, is generally going to put his quarterbacks in position to succeed. He's one of the best offensive minds of his generation. And I think he's doing a good job of doing that for Nix.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point on a lot of it is catch and run stuff. But I think that I feel like the Jaden Daniels offense in Washington is kind of similar. It's a lot of screens and short passes, and then from time to time they'll let it loose to McLaurin or someone like that down the field. Do you think that that's just the recipe for young quarterbacks to find success early?
I think it's a pretty good baseline, but the thing earlier in the season with Washington was they were getting that stuff and Daniels was hitting the stuff down the field. I saw someone, I can't remember who, pointed out that since the rib injury that Daniels had a few weeks ago, their downfield passing game has basically disappeared, where what was making them, so difficult to stop earlier in the year was that he was getting all the easy stuff that was schemed up for him, but he was also creating with his legs outside of structure. He's down like 3 or 4 rushing attempts per game and 30 or 40 rushing yards per game since that injury. And then the downfield passing stuff that he was hitting pretty consistently earlier on in the year has now gone by the wayside as well. So, getting the shorter stuff and run after catch stuff and get the ball out quick, like that's the stuff that every quarterback has to do or you're not going to find success at all. And if you can't do that early on, you tend to struggle, like we saw with Bryce Young last year, like we've seen at times from Caleb Williams this season, because that's just an extremely poorly designed offense in Chicago. But yeah, I think in general, I would consider that the baseline. And then where you go from there sort of has to do with, what else you can scheme up and what your quarterback can do reading defenses and being able to hit stuff down the field.
Joined by Jared Dubin of CBSSports.com. He covers the NFL over there. And then over at lastnightbasketball.com, you can read his stuff on the NBA. You mentioned earlier that the Dolphins and the Bengals could both potentially make a late season push and grab that last wild card spot. If you had to pick between one of those two teams to make that run, who would you choose?
I guess the Dolphins, just because they have one fewer loss. Like the Bengals basically have to win out probably if they're going to take that last wild card spot, because you got to figure at least one of Denver or Indy or Miami is not going to get up above 7 losses. Like unless all 3 of those teams get up above 7 losses, then Cincinnati needs to win out. So it's just a little bit more difficult.
Yeah, that makes sense. Are you surprised that we have – so obviously Joe Douglas, he got fired yesterday, the GM for the Jets. Are you surprised that Doug Peterson still has a job or any other head coaches?
Yeah, I'm particularly surprised with Peterson. Like, it's their bye week. If you were going to make an in-season change, this would be the time to do it. I can't see it lasting beyond this season, like, given the way things have gone the last couple of years. So, yeah, I would say I'm pretty surprised. I guess the one thing holding me back from saying it's a total shock is that there's not really an obvious interim head coach there. Press Taylor, the offensive coordinator, is a pretty significant part of the problem. And we've seen that with Doug Peterson in the past, where he lost the Eagles job basically because he wouldn't part ways with Press Taylor as the offensive coordinator. And, it's not like Ryan Nielsen's defense has done all that well this year either. So there's not necessarily an obvious guy who we'd say, this is going to be the guy that's going to be the interim coach for the rest of the year.
So coaches being fired in the NFL, it happens every year. Usually around 8 guys get fired a year, which is a quarter of the league, which is kind of crazy. Obviously, Robert Saleh, he's already been fired, and Allen down in New Orleans has been fired. If you had to kind of take a guess at 5 other guys who could potentially be fired either at some point this year or in the offseason, who would you pick?
5 additional guys from those. Peterson is an obvious one. I would say that both Mike McCarthy and Brian Daboll are pretty high up there on that list. You could maybe see Kevin Stefanski in Cleveland if things continue to go really, really badly. Matt Eberflus in Chicago, I guess, would be up on that list.
Yeah.
If things go truly horribly for the Raiders the rest of the year, it might be one season out with Antonio Pierce. Those are just sort of spitballing off the top of my head, I guess.
Which of those guys do you think gets rehired first?
I would think Daboll pretty quickly gets an offensive coordinator job. Eberflus probably gets a defensive coordinator job if he wants it. Those are probably the ones that I'd say, yeah.
Okay, yeah. That's kind of how I feel about it, which is always an interesting thing. I don't feel like it's a good sign when you fire someone and then they get hired really quickly after. You know what I mean? Like I would feel like I made a mistake. Do you kind of feel the same way about that?
I guess it depends on the situation. I wouldn't necessarily say it's really bad when they get hired as a coordinator instead. Like sometimes the guy is just better suited to be a coordinator than a head coach. We've seen that with guys like, Wade Phillips or Steve Spagnuolo or, plenty of other guys in the past. So that's not necessarily a thing. Like if you saw, let's say for some strange reason, the 49ers fired Kyle Shanahan and he would get a head coaching job like before the phone was even hung up, that would be pretty bad. But then you also see, the Dolphins fired Adam Gase a bunch of years ago. The Jets hired him right away. That didn't really mean anything. He was still pretty bad.
Yeah, that's totally fair. I want to switch gears over to the NBA because there's drama in the NBA as always. And Philadelphia is just I find it funny. I don't like the Sixers. I don't like Joel Embiid. I just think basketball players should play basketball, which seems like a crazier and crazier idea every day. But obviously, for my listeners who don't know, the 76ers had a players-only meeting. Tyrese Maxey calls out Joel Embiid for being late and things of that nature. What do you think is going on with the 76ers, and how does this impact the rest of their season?
The big thing is just that they haven't had their guys on the court at the same time yet. Like Joel Embiid, Paul George, and Tyrese Maxey have played 0 minutes together. 13, 14 games into the season. Granted, should they be, 2-11 or whatever they are right now? Absolutely not. Like with even 1 or 2 of those guys on the court, you got to win some games. Joel, even when he's been out there, has not looked like himself. The off the court stuff, I would say that there have been sort of rumblings about Embiid's work ethic and lateness and stuff like that going back a while now. I remember my friend Yaron Weitzman wrote a book about the Sixers a few years back, and there were all kinds of details in there about, Embiid from early in his career showing up late to stuff, not necessarily, working all that hard and shoot arounds and practices and stuff like that. The fact that Maxey felt compelled to call him out in front of the entire team, I think is pretty notable considering the relationship those two guys have. And I would say things obviously are not going well. I don't know when the last time, someone went 9-10 games below 500 and still wound up making the playoffs was. They're going to have to do a whole lot of work throughout the rest of the season.
They are. Joel Embiid may have to play in back-to-backs, which is, I don't know why they'd ask him to do that, but
I mean, look, like the injury issues he has obviously are real and significant. Like the guy can't go multiple weeks without injuring something, which like that's kind of what the history of basketball is for most guys who are, over 7 feet and, 275 pounds or whatever he is. Guys that size just generally don't really stay healthy. And he's obviously, he missed the entire first 2 years of his career because of injuries. And he's obviously missed significant time every year since then. He can't get to the end of the season healthy. Like, it's not like he's not playing because he doesn't want to play. Like, the back-to-back stuff is because they're trying to get him through not just April, but May and potentially June, if they would ever actually get there healthy. And it just can't happen.
Joined by Jared Dubin, who covers the NFL for CBSSports.com, and then he also covers basketball over at Last Night and basketball.com. Check out both of those places to read everything that he writes. He does just a fantastic job. My thing with Joel Embiid, and maybe my stance on this is just too broad, but I feel like a lot of injuries, like I feel like basketball injuries are usually not like NFL injuries, where like NFL injuries are impacted based off of the buildup of taking hits the entire season. Whereas I feel like most basketball injuries are just, I went up to grab a rebound and I landed on someone else's foot and I sprained my ankle and now I'm out for 6 weeks. And like for Joel Embiid, like it's just, it's hard for me to watch him miss all these games. And part of it is because like I like watching him play. He's incredibly dominant. And so I think there's a part of me that's like, I just want to see him play more, just from this enjoyment standpoint. But the other thing is like LeBron James is 39 and he's going to play a lot of games this year. And I feel like when you see a guy do that, it's hard to justify someone who's a decade younger not playing in back-to-backs.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we should very much resist the urge to compare anyone, even other professional athletes, to LeBron.
Fair enough.
Dude is a human cyborg somehow that has completely shattered everyone's idea of what aging is like. Like I remember like 5 years ago, there was, or I guess more than that now, like, oh my God, why is Carmelo Anthony not in the league right now? This is crazy. And it was like, because he's 34 years old and isn't very good anymore. And before LeBron and I guess, Steph and KD and Chris Paul came around, guys were just out of the league at that point. They didn't have jobs anymore. Those guys sort of shattered our idea of what it's like to get into your mid to late 30s and be able to stay healthy. Like, Larry Bird retired at 31, 32 years old because of, persistent back issues. Generally, that's when guys started falling off. Obviously, you could stay healthier now because of, year-round training and all the different technology we have. But also, the history of guys Embiid's size, they generally don't stay healthy no matter how young they are. There are exceptions to that rule, obviously, but when you had so many injury issues throughout your career, then you're probably going to keep having them. Do I want to see him play every game? Absolutely. The dude is ridiculously dominant when he's out there. The back-to-back thing, I think, is less about the age than it is about like the accumulation of so many different issues over the years and the desire to have him, not for the games that matter more, but for when they're, trying to win in the playoffs. Like we saw last year, he was hurt in the playoffs. The year before, he was hurt in the playoffs. Like, when was the last time he made it through a playoff healthy? The answer is never.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I'm wrong on this. I know that I am. I just, like I said, like I want to see him play more. And
frustration. Like, who doesn't want to see the dude out there all the time? Like, I would love it if he was able to play every game. I think for guys like him and Kawhi Leonard, who are sort of the ones that everybody points to as like, oh my God, NBA stars never play anymore. Like those are two guys with basically like degenerative conditions. Like Kawhi Leonard's knee just does not function right anymore. The fact that, he's sitting out all these games, like there's a reason for that. Embiid has had a gazillion issues over the years. For the most part, the other guys, when they're able to play, they play. And I know for a fact that it's the training staff more than anyone else that when they're like, oh, you got to rest tonight, that's not like players saying, hey, I don't want to play. Like if they had a choice, they would play every game and for the most part, there are very few guys in the league that are able to overrule the training staff when they say, like, hey, your body is in a condition right now where you're so susceptible to an injury that you really can't play tonight. There are very few guys in the league that organizations will allow to do that. And that's just kind of the way it is right now because of the way they're prioritizing both the future and the playoffs and all these different things. I think that barring shortening the season, which is never going to happen because nobody wants to give up the money, they need to start the season 2 weeks earlier and just remove all back-to-backs. Like, that, to me, is a big thing. There should never be any back-to-backs with very few exceptions. They've gotten it down to, I think, like 9, 10, 11 per team. Or, I think the most for any team this year is like 14. If they could get that down into the 4, 5, 6 range, or preferably the 0 range, then that, I think, would do a lot to alleviate some of the issues.
That is the best idea I think I've heard on that. By far. Do you think that with the Sixers being so far behind the 8 ball, last I checked, they were 2-11. Do you think there's any chance that they come off that rule for Embiid just to hopefully make up some ground so that they can make the playoffs?
Yeah, I think if he's able to get himself healthier and into shape enough to be able to play some back-to-backs, then yeah, there's a certain point they're probably going to have to either ask or allow him to do it. But I think that depends on his actually being able to physically do it.
Joined by Jared Dubin, who covers the NFL over at CBS Sports. You can read his stuff at cbssports.com. You can read his stuff on basketball over at lastnightinbasketball.com. You can also follow him on Twitter at JADubin and then the number 5. I want to quickly ask you a couple questions about the Pacers, and then I'll let you go. Do you think that the Pacers' struggles this year are more because of just the amount of injuries that they've had, or is it more about Halliburton being bad to start the year?
Probably a little bit of both. I think that Halliburton's struggles are at least somewhat related to like the back issues that he's dealt with too. And that obviously plays into, like, is it injuries or is it Halliburton? It's probably both. And then obviously just having your depth sapped both in the backcourt and then at backup center is really tough to deal with. And I think that the way that last season played out in the playoffs probably gave people a little bit of a different idea of how good the team was coming into this season than maybe we should have. Like, I remember hearing during the playoffs, like, the Pacers got much better on defense during the playoffs. If they can, carry that over to next season, then they should be able to get even better. And then I was, writing my season preview for them, and I was looking just at the playoff numbers, and I was like, their defense was one of the worst in the playoffs. They just happened to play against a pair of teams in the first 2 rounds that, the Bucks lost Giannis and Dame was playing hurt. The Knicks lost basically everybody and Brunson was playing hurt. And they were just essentially not able to function the right way offensively in those series. Then they come up against the Celtics, and like everybody else, they get kind of blasted. And the defense, I don't think, has been there this year, and the offense hasn't been operating as high a level because their best player hasn't been himself, and because they haven't had some of the other really important guys out there on a consistent basis.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think the other thing that's interesting about the Pacers this year, they aren't playing as fast. At least they definitely weren't to start the year. I think they've picked it up a bit here as of late. And you're right. Like, when your defense is that bad, and we shouldn't be surprised by this because they've brought literally everybody back. So it's hard to expect for the defense to improve when you bring back literally the exact same roster as the year before. And like you said, like, the offense just hasn't been there. Last thing for you, and then I will let you go. Once again, joined by Jared Dubin. You can read his stuff on basketball over at lastnightinbasketball.com. Are you surprised by the leap that we've seen from Benedict Mathurin this year?
I don't know if I expected quite this much of a step forward, but he was, outside of the top few guys, he was my favorite guy to watch in that draft class. Like, the combination of shooting and athleticism that he has, I remember before the draft comparing it to, like, if everything works out correctly, like, he's basically Zach LaVine offensively, which sounds like an insult now because everybody thinks about his contract and his knee issues. But when you watch that guy play, when he's actually healthy, it's pretty unbelievable offensive package. And, Mathurin sort of looks like he's headed in that direction, at least offensively. I think there's still things to work on defense, but the offensive package that he has in the combination of shooting, athleticism, and the skill set that he has when he's able to have the ball in his hands is really high level. I think you should expect him to become a very good offensive player, and it's a matter of being able to, consistently harness that every single night, access the right parts of the skill set at the right times every single night, and then hopefully be able to, use a little bit more of his athleticism to better use and his size to better use on defense on a more consistent basis. But he should be a good player.
He should be. The defensive stuff doesn't worry me too much. I think a lot of it's an effort thing. I think there's a lot of young players in the league who don't defend great unless they play for the Magic, because they're young and they defend their butts off every night. They're so much fun to watch. Jared, thanks for your time, man. As always, you were awesome.
Thanks for having me, man. Have a good day.
You too. That is Jared Dubin. You can follow him on Twitter at JADubin5. You can check out his NFL coverage over at CBSSports.com. You can check out his basketball coverage over at lastnightinbasketball.com. When we come back here in 4 minutes, Purdue lost their first game of the year on the road to Marquette last night. My thoughts on that when we come back here in about 4 minutes.
Welcome back to the real Jonathan Smith Show on Indy's Sports Ticket, 1430 AM and 99.5 HD2.
What's going on? The real Jonathan Smith Show here on Indy's Sports Ticket. Purdue went on the road last night to take on Marquette. And Purdue lost pretty handily. That game didn't really feel close at all. Marquette, really good. Fun team to watch. They really defend. They were tough. And because they defend so well, Purdue really struggled on the offensive end of the floor. Look, Purdue's wins and losses are going to be really easy to figure out this year. They've had a turnover issue in every game they've played except for one. In the one game, they didn't have the issue, came against Alabama. They only turned it over 3 times, okay? The other thing that's going to matter is how well they shoot the ball, because I like Trey Kaufman-Renn. He's a good player, clearly. But he's not Zach Edey, and that's okay. So, like, the reliance on three-point shooting is going to be much more important for Purdue this year, even than it was last year, and it was obviously an important part of their game. They didn't shoot the ball well last night. They shot 33% from 3. That simply will not cut it, and they had 15 turnovers. Like, you're not beating anybody if you shoot that poorly. Or let me back up. You're not beating anybody good if you shoot that poorly and you commit that many turnovers. They have to shoot the ball better. It's really that simple. The bright side, Trey Kaufman-Renn was good again. 7 of 10 from the floor, 16 points. Like, Purdue has to have an interior presence that can go score. And if Trey Kaufman-Renn continues to be that, then they're going to win a lot of games. It's really that simple, right? Because they have plenty of shooting. They just didn't make shots last night. And sometimes you're going to play against teams like Marquette, who are talented and defend their butts off. I was so impressed with Marquette last night, and just the way that they defended. They were relentless. I thought they did a good job of keeping Purdue out of their offense. Like, that's a good, tough team up there in Marquette. But Purdue, they'll be fine. They just have to cut down on the turnovers and hit a couple more shots, right? 6 of 18 from 3 simply will not cut it. If you don't believe me, then go ask the the Indiana basketball team from last year, okay? Because the Indiana basketball team last year was good, talented. The issue was they couldn't shoot. And because they couldn't shoot, they lost a lot of games. And when you look at Purdue, they've shot 40% or better from 3 in every other game that they've played this year. And they won all of them, okay? So even if you turn the ball over too much, if you shoot the ball well from 3, then you'll be fine. So Purdue, they're going to be fine. Like, I'm not worried about them at all. Matt Painter is likely going to fix the issues that they have, cut down on the turnovers. They've got good experienced guards. Fletcher Lawyer, I think he's gotten better, right? Like, he's a little bit better off the bounce. Braden Smith, he's been fine. No, he hasn't, I don't think, lived up to the expectations I had for him so far, but it's early in the year. It's not even Thanksgiving yet. So I'm not going to worry about it too much. Purdue will be fine. They just lost to a good team in Marquette last night because they turned it over too much and they didn't shoot the ball well. That is a losing recipe for every single team in the country. When we come back here in about 4 minutes, I've got thoughts on college football playoff rankings. Indiana, what do they do? How do they stack up to the other teams, that are ranked around them? All those thoughts coming your way when we come back here in about 4.5 minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for
It's the Real Jonathan Smith Show on Indy's Sports Ticket, 1430 AM and 99.5 HD2.
What's going on? It's the Real Jonathan Smith Show here on Indy Sports Ticket. Hopefully you've had a nice week. Wednesday, we're halfway there. We're 8 days away from Thanksgiving, which is kind of nuts. Don't mind it, though. Do not mind it, though. The college football playoff rankings came out last night. Indiana, if the playoffs started today, would be the 7th seed. They would host 10th seeded Ole Miss Rebels. Alabama would play Notre Dame as the 8 and 9 seeds. Oregon, Boise State, Texas, and Miami would get the 4 byes. And then on the other side of the bracket, BYU would get the last spot as the 12th seed, and then Ohio State would be the 5 seed, and then Georgia and Penn State would play in the 11 versus 6 seed. So that is the bracket as of today. Indiana, despite being the 7th seed, is ranked 5th. Before I talk about the rankings and everything, I want to quickly highlight the dumbest thing I think I may have ever heard in my life. Joey Galloway of ESPN said something just insane on ESPN last night. I'm still not over it. Here's the most insane take I think I've ever heard.
They can't go any higher.
They are behind a one-loss
They have
team.
a chance to go on the road and prove what they are. Now, honestly, if we believe in what our metrics are saying, if I'm Indiana, I don't know if I'm playing Rourke against Ohio State. We've seen what happened to Florida State last year, Jordan Travis. What could keep Indiana out of this? Getting their quarterback hurt. We've seen it happen to Florida State last year, having not played anybody.
Or losing by 30.
If you look at 3, 4, and 5, Texas, Penn State, and Indiana, they literally have played nobody between all 3 teams. The toughest team in that is Vandy. So a lot of this that we're looking at is eye test.
That is Joey Galloway of ESPN saying that Indiana should not play Curtis Rourke on Saturday, which is incredibly stupid. First and foremost, Indiana is not going to sit Curtis Rourke. Secondly, they shouldn't, because if they win, which they're capable of doing, then they're in the playoff. No questions asked. Even if they lose to Purdue. Okay? Jeez. And they're likely playing against Oregon in the Big Ten title game if they win on Saturday. Okay? Like, amidst all of the dumb takes I've heard about Indiana football over the last week, this guy saying that Curtis Rourke should be sat out on Saturday is the dumbest one I've heard by far. It may be the dumbest take I've heard all year. That's just, it's incredibly terrible. Indiana, they're ranked 5th. Talk about stuff that actually makes sense now. In Indiana, ranked 5th. They didn't move up or down. They stayed in the same spot, which they should have, coming off the bye week. This is where I'd have them ranked. I think they're the 5th best team in the country, so they should be ranked 5th. And they've obviously been in a lot of conversations throughout the week, dogging them for their schedule, saying that Indiana doesn't play anybody, which is true. But they're winning by an average of 30 points per game. Okay, if you watch them play, then they clearly deserve to be ranked 5th in the country. Okay, like this is my biggest thing. I don't mind if other people have opinions on teams. I don't care. Just watch the football games, please. And if you only watch your team, then please don't tell me your opinion on some team you've watched play 7 snaps this year. I don't want to hear it. It is so incredibly important to watch the games, and we're seeing it with Indiana right now. If someone tells you that Indiana doesn't deserve to be ranked 5th, if someone tells you that Indiana doesn't deserve a spot in the college football playoff because of their schedule, then just very simply ask them the question of how many games have you watched Indiana play? Okay, the answer won't be very many. And if they say Indiana doesn't belong, then they're just telling on themselves. Okay, they're telling on themselves. They're telling you that they haven't watched the game, because whether or not Indiana wins on Saturday in Columbus against Ohio State, they deserve to be in. Whether they lose by 3 or if they lose by 50, they should be in either way. Yes, results should matter. Winning and losing should matter. Records should matter. Who you play should matter. Like I think that Georgia, Alabama, Ole Miss, Tennessee, A&M, I think they all have a fair complaint with how scheduling is kind of worked out this year. When you look at Penn State and Indiana, who haven't played super tough games outside of the games against Ohio State. And then you've got Georgia, who's having to play, at Alabama, and I think they had to go to Ole Miss, and they hosted Tennessee this last Saturday, and they played Clemson, and like teams in the SEC, I think, do have a legitimate gripe about scheduling. Okay, and like that should matter, as well as how badly you beat teams. Like it should matter for Indiana, the fact that they're beating teams by an average of 30 points per game. The thing, though, that we can do with all of them, no matter how hard the schedule is, no matter how easy the schedule is, no matter what their record is, we can all sit down on our couches on Sunday with a nice big bag of chips and watch them play football. And we can sit back and we can ask very simple questions like, do they look like a good football team? Do they look like they're one of the 12 best teams in the country? When they're playing their best, who can beat them? When they're playing their worst, who can beat them? When they're playing at an average level, how good are they? We can ask all these important questions. That's why the eye test is important. That's why it's important to watch the games, because you can apply the eye test and what you've seen, no matter the schedule, the record, or the name bias. Okay? Like, I promise you, if people would just sit down, and I'm not talking about Indiana fans, because obviously you guys have watched Indiana play all year, so you know how good this football team is. I'm talking about the SEC people. If they sat down and they watched Indiana play, they wouldn't be saying these crazy things about them not deserving to be in the playoff, because they clearly do. They're clearly one of the 12 best teams in the world of college football, which means that they should be in. Okay? The team that does not deserve to be ranked as high as they are is Penn State. Because if you sit down on your couch on Sunday with your big bag of chips, I'm a Doritos guy personally, but if you sit down and you watch them play football, it's pretty evident that Penn State isn't that great. I've got more on that here in a moment. When it comes to the game coming up on Saturday, Ohio State versus Indiana, no matter what happens, Indiana should be in the playoff. Whether they lose by 50, lose by a last-second field goal, or they win the game, they should be in. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Because the College Football Playoff Committee has set a precedent that Indiana undoubtedly falls under, even if they lose. If Notre Dame can be ranked 6th, with their best win being against Navy, love the troops, very much support the troops, but if that's your best win, I'm not super impressed. If Notre Dame can be ranked 6th after beating Navy and Texas A&M, I guess that's their best win. That's my bad. Sorry, Notre Dame fans. That was a little disrespectful of me. Their best win is A&M. I'm sorry. Either way, though, if Notre Dame can be in and rank 6th after losing to Northern Illinois, then Indiana should get a spot regardless of what happens on Saturday on the road in Columbus against what the committee is telling me is the second best team in the country. They should be in because Notre Dame's ranked 6th with the worst loss in the country. If Penn State can be ranked 4th with an incredibly similar schedule to Indiana, if Penn State can be ranked 4th with an incredibly soft schedule like Indiana, despite losing to Ohio State, then Indiana should be in the top 12 no matter what happens on Saturday. No question about it. The precedent has been set that if Indiana loses to Ohio State, it should not impact their standing that much. Okay? And once again, if you just watch the games, then there should be no question asked as to whether or not Indiana is one of the 12 best teams in the country. They are undoubtedly deserving of one of these spots. The question is whether or not the committee will allow that to happen. Because let's be honest, the name Indiana just isn't as sexy in the world of college football as Notre Dame and Penn State, who could very easily get into the playoff with Indiana missing it just because of their name, even though their resume really isn't all that much better. Okay, that long spiel leads me to a new little bit we're going to do on the show. We're going to call it Fraud Watch. Every week after the college football playoff rankings come out, I'm going to tell you the frauds based off of the rankings. So without further ado, here is Fraud Watch. Our first team here on Fraud Watch this week, Penn State. Okay. Penn State is very simply not very good at football. Okay. And it's like, well, Jonathan, they're 9-1. Have you watched them play? That's always my first question. Ohio State played terribly and still beat them by a touchdown. Ohio State fumbled the ball out of the back of the end zone through a horrendous pick six, and they still won by a touchdown. Penn State didn't score an offensive touchdown. Like, need I say more? They barely beat Bowling Green. They barely beat Illinois, 21-7. Illinois, a team that doesn't have a win over another team with a winning record all year. They had to come back from down double digits against USC. I'm telling you, like, sit down, watch Penn State and that pathetic offense play, and you will very easily be like, okay, yeah, they're not the fourth best team in the country. Okay, they're like the 10th best team in the country. Therefore, that is where they should be ranked, because the rankings should just reflect who the best teams are. Simple as that. And Penn State is clearly not the fourth best team in college football. Okay, next on the list, Miami. Miami is the opposite of Penn State. Okay, I had Jared Dubin on earlier. He went to Miami, so we were talking about it, and he said something that's exactly right. They have the best quarterback in the country. That offense is electric. It's why they've won all of the games that they've won. And where Penn State, I don't trust the offense, but I do trust the defense. With Miami, I very much trust that offense, and I very much do not trust that defense. Okay, because once again, Cam Ward and the offense is electric, but that defense is awful. And they don't have any great wins. Their best win's Louisville, who's 6-4. And they haven't blown out bad teams. They should have lost to Virginia Tech, but the replay center bailed them out and overturned a Hail Mary play. They should have lost to Cal, but the replay center bailed them out again and missed a pretty blatant and obvious targeting call. Once again, they barely beat Louisville. That's their best win. And they lost to an average Georgia Tech team. Like, that is not the 8th best team in the country. It's just not. Like, sit down, watch the games. You'll be impressed by the offense, no doubt, but that defense is horrendously bad, and it's not worthy of being ranked 8th. It's not worthy of being ranked in front of a team like SMU, who I think is better than Miami. Next on the list, Boise State, the last team on the list as well. So Boise State has Ashton Jeanty, which he in of himself is kind of controversial, because I know there's people pounding the table for him to be the Heisman winner. It shouldn't be him. It should be Travis Hunter. That's a monologue for another day. And I get it. I know Ashton Jeanty's awesome. But Boise State as a team, I'm just not convinced that they're the 12th best team in the country. The fact that they could get a bye is absurd to me, to say the least. They played Oregon tough. Congratulations. But Oregon's gotten a lot better. Oregon's much better now than they were 2 months ago. They just are. And that's when they played, and Oregon won 37-34. Okay. When it comes to Boise State, I just don't think that they've gotten much better since then. And they just haven't been dominant against bad teams. Like, they barely beat UNLV. They barely beat Nevada. If you're a non-Power 4 school, you have to blow out everyone in your conference for me to have any sort of faith in you. Even back in the BCS era, when we would look up and Boise State would be ranked 4th, I'd be like, yeah, they didn't play anybody, but at least they blew everybody out. Boise State simply hasn't done that. And as annoying as it is to see frauds ranked this high, the most frustrating part of these rankings is seeing BYU drop 8 spots. Okay, because I'm just, look, my stance on how teams should be ranked is pretty clear. I think they should just rank the best teams in order. Right? I think that if they just did that, people wouldn't be all that upset. I don't think that they would. Right? But instead, they factor in resumes and strength of schedules and all these things. Whereas, like, if you just sit down and watch the teams play, I think it becomes pretty apparent who the best teams are. Right? And if they just ranked based off of that, it'd be much easier. And BYU falling 8 spots after 1 loss to Kansas tells me that the College Football Playoff Committee never believed that BYU was the 6th best team in the country. They clearly didn't believe that. They only had them ranked that high because they were undefeated. And I'm very interested to see what they do with Indiana if they lose to Ohio State on Saturday? Are they going to do the exact same thing to Indiana that they've done to BYU? Plummet them in the rankings because they never truly believed in them in the first place. Okay, I would hope not, because losing to Ohio State is very different than losing to Kansas, right? And the other thing that I think is frustrating about the BYU stuff is, like I say that they dropped 8 spots because they lost to Kansas, and you would probably say something along the lines of, yeah, because they lost to Kansas. Once again, Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois, and they are ranked 6th. It just needs to be consistent. That's all that I'm really asking for here. Can I just get a little bit of consistency in how they rank these teams? That would be much appreciated, because it's just another year of us not knowing how they're ranking teams. Just make it make sense, okay? Like, I don't care how it shakes out. My team sucks. They're not going to play in the playoff anyway. Just make it make sense. Just there should be a clear criteria that we can look at and be like, okay, they're doing these rankings based off of blank. And that just simply isn't present with these current rankings. But look, it won't matter in 2 weeks, because certain teams are going to win, other teams are going to lose, and we'll just kind of have to maneuver from there. When we come back here in about 4 minutes, the Indiana Pacers, they're playing basketball tonight. They're playing the Rockets. I have many thoughts, not really many. I have some interesting thoughts on the Indiana Pacers. I'm going to give them to you when we come back here in about 4 minutes.
The best takes, stories, and entertainment. It's The Real Jonathan Smith Show on Indy Sports Ticket. 1430 AM and 99.5 HD2.
What's going on? It's The Real Jonathan Smith Show here on Indy's Sports Ticket. Hopefully you guys are having a nice day. Pacers playing the Rockets tonight. College football playoff rankings came out yesterday. And I haven't talked about the Pacers in a minute, and I would like to because things are not going very well. Okay, now look, it's early. Played, 14 games this year, 15 games this year, a lot of season left. But I think it's time to officially be concerned about the Indiana Pacers. The Pacers, over the weekend, they lose two games that they should have won, right? They lose to Orlando without Paolo Banchero, and then they lose to the Miami Heat without Jimmy Butler. Then they bounce back and they beat the Heat the next night. And then they revert back to their old ways of losing games that they shouldn't lose when they lose to the Toronto Raptors, one of the worst teams in the NBA. And the people who watch that game and the people who know what's going on with the team will be like, well, they're banged up. No James Wiseman, no Isaiah Jackson. They signed Moses Brown, I think that's his name, today to kind of fill that backup center role. Miles Turner didn't play against the Raptors. So like they didn't have a center on their roster at all. Like they're running 6'7" Enrique Freeman out there to play center. And while I like Enrique Freeman, I don't think he should be your starting center. I don't care though. I don't care about the injuries at all. The Pacers had the guy who should have been the best player in the game in Tyrese Halliburton, who is still sucking it up to say the least. And on a night where he should have been the best player, Tyrese Halliburton, instead, Jakob Poeltl and RJ Barrett were the two best players in that game. And, if you want to make excuses for the Pacers and talk about the injuries, that's fine. I get it. But until Tyrese Halliburton figures it out and starts playing well, until he starts knocking down shots, they aren't going to win very many games, as we're seeing right now. Bennedict Mathurin's been awesome this year. Pascal Siakam's been awesome this year. Miles Turner's been really good this year. All three of those guys have played well. But if your best player, the guy who has the ball in his hands more than anyone else, if that guy doesn't play well, you aren't going to win very many games. You're going to struggle to make the playoffs. Tyrese Halliburton's averaging 16 points and 9 assists a game, which is that's fine. The 9 assists per game is great. Okay, he's continuing to find his teammates and to get those guys involved. It's part of why they've won the 6 games that they've won. That's a good number. 9 assists a game is impressive. 16 points though. I don't think that Puma wanted to sign you as the face of their brand because you average 16 points a game. Sorry. I don't think that that's the case. He has to shoot the ball better. Okay, he's shooting 39% from the floor. It's not very good. He's shooting 29% from 3. That's abysmal. Okay, and he's a career 40%, 3-point shooter. Every time they cut to him on the bench, he's clearly got back spasms or something along those lines. I don't care. If you're playing, then I expect for you to play great. And if you're not going to, and if the back spasms or whatever's going on with Tyrese Halliburton, if they are so bad that it inhibits your ability to be great, take a week off. Seriously, sit out. Miss some games, because as of right now, I feel like Halliburton's hurting this team more than he's helping them. There is a lot of depth. I get it. Injuries have been an issue this year, but I don't care. Let TJ McConnell and Bennedict Mathurin run the offense for a week. Let Halliburton actually get healthy, because they aren't going to win anything unless he is healthy. Okay, and look, maybe it's not because of his back. Maybe that's not why they're losing games. Maybe it's because of the new Puma deal. Maybe he's distracted. Maybe it's because of all the cameras following him around for the Netflix documentary. If something else is going on, we're going to find out after the season when that drops. I don't know what it is. I would like to think that it's just, his back is messed up. That's what I would like to think, right? Because he's had these issues for 14 straight games. He has to be better. He has to score the ball. He has to shoot well. If those two things don't happen, then no matter how well Miles Turner, Pascal Siakam, and Benedict Mathurin play, the Pacers aren't going to make the playoffs. Okay? Halliburton has to be the guy, not just a guy. And to start the year, he's just been a guy. 16 points, 9 assists. That's cute, bro. You got to be better. Okay? Like, you signed this big-time extension. It is time to be better than what he's been so far this season. I want to get into Purdue last night. They lost to Marquette. Not the end of the world. Marquette's really good, right? They ended Purdue's 39 straight non-conference win streak, which is insane to win 39 in a row, given the teams that Purdue has played this year. When you look at Marquette, first off, they're good. They're really tough on defense. That was really kind of the thing for me that popped when watching Marquette play. That Purdue offense struggled mightily. They shot less than 40% from the floor. Okay, and Purdue's a good offensive team that runs good stuff and finds ways to score points. Okay, so before I talk about the issues that Purdue had, I just want to acknowledge that Marquette's good. That Cam Jones kid, he can really play. Okay, that guard for them, he can really play. So, yeah, there's the flowers to Marquette. Let's talk about Purdue now. They turn the ball over too much. Like Purdue is not going to be that hard to figure out this year. They've struggled with turnovers in every single game that they've played, except for one. Against Alabama, they only turned the ball over 3 times. That's why they beat Alabama. That and the fact that they shot 56% from 3. We'll get into the shooting here in a moment. But Purdue turned the basketball over 15 times last night. If you're playing against one of the 20 best teams in the country, which it seems like Marquette is, and you turn the ball over that much, you're probably not going to win. They turn the ball over way too much. That is their biggest issue right now. And look, it's Matt Painter. I've got all the faith in the world in him to fix it and to figure things out. But if they continue to have issues turning the ball over, which you would think that they wouldn't get given the experience that they have at the guard spots, if they continue to turn it over, good luck. Like, you're not going to beat very, very many teams. And in addition to the turnovers last night for Purdue, they also just didn't shoot the ball very well. Okay? Like, ask the Indiana basketball team from last year what happens when you don't make threes. You lose. That's what happens. Okay, Purdue they shot 33% from 3. That dog won't hunt. Like, you have to make open threes if you're Purdue. Like, especially if, your 2 best players are, well, I don't know if they're the 2 best players, but if 2 of your if 2 of your players that are supposed to be more productive on offense are Fletcher Loyer and Braden Smith, like, and you don't shoot the ball well from 3, it's usually going to mean that those guys didn't play well. Okay, and I didn't think that Braden Smith was very good last night. So they have to shoot the ball better from 3. If you look at all of their wins, they shot 40% from 3 or better. If you look at that win against Alabama, they shot 56% from 3. They have to shoot the ball well. If they shoot 33% from 3, given the issues that they have in turning the basketball over, they aren't going to beat good teams. It's really that simple. Now, bright side for Purdue. Trey Kaufman-Renn. That guy can play. He's a good player. He has played really well to start the year. He was dominant, right, against Alabama, had 26 points, felt like he didn't miss. Nate Oates, after the game, came out and said that he didn't realize that Trey Kaufman-Renn was that good. Last night, Trey Kaufman-Renn was efficient, 7 of 10 from the floor, 16 points. It's good. Right? Like if he continues to be that productive, if he can continue to be this just consistent presence on the low block for Purdue in the half court, then Purdue's going to be fine. Okay? They just have to make those open threes. They have to avoid turning the ball over, and they have to find a way to rebound. Okay? Also, Will Berg is awful. That guy, he's like, okay, people last year said that Zach Edey was just big, right? And that's why he was so good. Like the fact that people said that, first off, is kind of insane to me. Secondly, if you want the definition of this guy's just big, it's Will Berg. That guy, that guy doesn't do anything. He played 9 minutes. He scored 2 points. He only had 2 rebounds in 9 minutes, and he's 7'2". The only thing he does is stand at the rim and put his hands up. Like, come on, like he's got to be better there. He's got to give them something on offense. That guy's an absolute zero as of right now. Okay, like the guy can't do much more than just make a layup, right? So like something has to be created for him. He's got to find a way to be a little more efficient on the offensive side of the ball. Purdue got to find a way to get something a little more from the bench as well. The Caleb first minutes that I've seen this year have been good. He's only, playing around 15 minutes a game, but I like when he's on the floor. Like he's just consistently in the right spot on defense. He can finish around the rim. He's going to challenge shots. He's going to make free throws. He didn't last night, 4 of 8, but he made them in the Alabama game. So those Caleb first minutes have been good. Kind of hoping to get more Miles Colvin minutes at some point, but he's got to start to score the ball. Like he played 20 minutes, but he grabbed 8 rebounds. He and Trey Coughlin led Purdue in rebounds, right? I think Purdue is going to need the athleticism of Miles Colvin throughout the year for more than just 20 minutes a game, right? Like we saw him defend Alabama's best player because of his athleticism. Okay, like that guy is going to be really important for them, and I'm very interested to see if they kind of start to give him more than just 20 minutes, right? That's how many he played against Marquette last night. That's how many he played against Alabama as well. So hopefully they can find a way to get him a little bit more involved. The other thing with them is rebounding. Look, if they can just hang even, which is what they did last night, they just, weren't, they just didn't make shots. If they make shots, they win that game. If you only shoot 33% from 3, good luck beating anybody. But that's the other thing with them. Like you have to pay attention to how well they rebound because the size just isn't there like it has been. And, with Zach Edey and, Wilberg, sure, he's 7'2", but once again, that guy is an absolute zero on offense. All he does is stand at the rim on defense and put his hands up. That's literally all he's been good for so far this season. So Purdue definitely not as good as they were last year, but there is also undoubtedly a path for them to win games. Not a doubt about it in my mind. When we come back here in about 4.5 minutes, what am I going to talk about? I've got options here. I have some options. I could do another Anthony Richardson thing. I could talk about the college football playoff a little bit more. I could talk about my favorite teams in the NBA. So many options. I think I'm going to roll with the Anthony Richardson stuff. He played really well on Sunday. Looking forward to seeing what he does against the Lions this upcoming week. Hopefully he can just have another good day, right? Even if the Colts don't win, obviously, like that's the ultimate goal. But the other thing that we want to see this year as Colts fans is the progression of Anthony Richardson. Hopefully he can be great again on Sunday. I'm going to talk a little bit about him when we come back here in about 4 minutes.
Unadulterated sports talk with unfiltered takes. It's the real Jonathan Smith Show on Indy Sports Tickets, 1430 AM and 99.5 HD2.
What's going on? It's the real Jonathan Smith Show here on Indy Sports Ticket. Hopefully you guys have had a nice week. Anthony Richardson, the Colts, getting ready to go against the Detroit Lions on Sunday. Big game. If they win that one, love their chances at making the playoff. Absolutely love their chances. Will they win that one? Probably not. Last time I checked, they were 7.5-point underdogs. I'm assuming that line has only gone up because, let's just be honest, the Colts haven't looked great. They looked really good against the Jets on Sunday, large part of that being Anthony Richardson. And Anthony Richardson said something interesting after the Jets game on Sunday that I think just needs to be noted. He said that's the most relaxed he's felt so far in his short NFL career in playing in a game. And that is such an important aspect of anything, right? Like if you aren't relaxed, doesn't matter what you're doing. You're not going to do very well. If you're too hyped up, if you're overly intense, then good luck. You're probably going to struggle. Here is Jim Bob Cooter yesterday talking about or answering a question about Anthony Richardson and just him being relaxed on Sunday.
Jim Bob, Anthony was saying that he felt relaxed, probably the most relaxed he's felt in an NFL game. What do you think of just the rhythm he's able to get when we were able to establish the run a little bit and obviously use him as a runner?
Yeah, I think it's always good to get going in a game, and every guy likes to do that a little different way. I think Anthony kind of mentioned his thought process on that the other day, and sometimes it is good to get out there and move around a little bit and get into the action a little bit. He, did a really nice job on game day of keeping a level head and staying in it, drive after drive. Sort of play after play. We had some good drives and some drives we wanted back, but we just kept chipping at it. And Anthony, his mindset was really, really good all day, trying to go find a way to get us that win we were searching for. For him to sort of get into the game in the right mode to get him in sort of that same mindset to go play good ball, drive after drive, and all that is something we're definitely keeping an eye on the best way to manage, and credit to him for sort of managing himself throughout the game and staying in a good place and having a good ball game.
That was Jim Bob Cooter, offensive coordinator of the Indianapolis Colts, right there talking about Anthony Richardson being relaxed on Sunday and how important it is, because being relaxed is important in anything that you do. Like for me, like when I played baseball, I didn't become a good baseball player until I learned how to relax. And part of that comes from playing experience, which Anthony Richardson is slowly starting to require, right? He started and finished 8 games now. He made the 11th start of his career on Sunday. So I'm sure part of why he was relaxed is just from having a little bit more experience. The other part of it is, like, I think the other part of being relaxed comes from knowing that you're capable of having success. And for Anthony Richardson, like, he just did a lot more this week, right? Like there was a lot more time spent in the film room, right? Like meeting with the offensive line coach, working on protections and those things. And when you spend more time doing stuff like that and you spend more time preparing, it is easier to believe that you're going to have success. Okay, so I think, the experience that Anthony Richardson is slowly accumulating played a role in him being more relaxed. And I think the other part of it is this requirement from the Colts of him to be more of an adult and to show up to work on time and to do all those things. Okay. And, just in the idea of being relaxed, like when I first started here, I work nights, right? I was on from like 9 to 10 p.m. Okay. And I would come in the next day, I'd produce Dan's show. And then Mike and I, my boss, we would sit down and we would go through my audio. Okay. Like that's what we would do. And he could always tell when I was relaxed and when I wasn't. Okay. He could always tell when I was talking about something that I was supremely confident in my opinion about versus when I wasn't. And, for me, like when I wasn't relaxed, like you could tell, right? Like voice tightened up a little bit, pitch change, didn't sound super sure of myself. And if you've listened to radio people for a long time, like my boss has, you can pick up on all of those things. And I think that throwing a football is a pretty similar thing. Like, I think it was pretty obvious that Anthony Richardson was relaxed early. Okay, that third drive especially is where I feel like it became apparent that he was relaxed, right? Because he hits Mo Alley Cox for a short pass. He hits Adonai Mitchell on that drag route that he busted for a big play. Later on in the game, we saw him hit Michael Pittman Jr. on this 4-yard out route, all those things. And, you've watched the Colts play. You know this. All of Anthony Richardson's missed throws had been missing high. Now, look, I've never played quarterback at any high level, okay? But I played baseball for a long time, okay? Played middle infield in college, played a little bit of outfield as well. So while I haven't thrown a football in a football game, I've thrown a baseball millions of times, okay? So I know something about throwing balls, okay, whether it's a football or a baseball. And when you miss high, it's often because you're throwing too hard. You're overthrowing, you're striding out too far. When that happens, the ball tends to sail. And that's whether you're throwing a baseball or a football. Either way, like that is just what tends to happen. And when guys miss low, it's usually because you don't have the arm strength or you lack the confidence to rear back and really let it go. Right or left is usually a mechanical thing. You dropped your arm, you overfinished, whatever it is. And through watching Anthony Richardson throughout this year, so many of his misses have been high. And I just think that he was too amped up. He was trying too hard. And he was throwing the ball too hard, right? And it didn't look that way on Sunday. He looked relaxed. The ball came out clean, right? And we saw it not just in him throwing the deep routes, but we also saw it in the short to intermediate passing game, right? And we saw how relaxed he was by his ability to stay composed and lead the Colts down the field for, what ended up being the game-winning drive. Okay, so hopefully we get that same relaxed Anthony Richardson on Sunday because the Lions are coming in, and that's the best team in the NFL, right? They're blowing out bad teams, they're beating good temes. They've done everything asked of them, right? And that offense is nothing short of elite. Okay, they put up points like no one, like better than anyone else, right? So Gus Bradley and Zaire Franklin and all these defensive guys are going to have their hands full on Sunday when the Lions come into town. But so is the offense. Because even if the Colts defense plays well, the Lions are still going to score points. They turned the football over 5 times against the Texans, and they still scored 29 points. Or whatever the final score of that game was. That was insane. So even if the Lions have a stretch where they struggle, like the Colts offense is going to be required to do more than just score 24 points. Okay, like this needs to be a game where they score like 28, 30, 35. That is the type of offensive output that we have to see from the Indianapolis Colts on Sunday for them to have a chance to win this game. And obviously the defense has to do their job as well. If they can force a couple turnovers, that would be big too. So looking forward to that game. Also looking forward to Saturday. The Indiana Hoosiers going on the road to take on the Ohio State Buckeyes. And the conversation around the Hoosiers these last couple days haven't been positive. A lot of questions, a lot of criticism about the Indiana Hoosiers, a lot of critiques on the schedule, which hasn't been good. Like as someone who has defended Indiana and is going to continue to do so, you know what the schedule is. It's not very good. It's just not. And, I think that the SEC fans and the SEC teams kind of calling out the lack of good opponents on Indiana's schedule. Like they have a valid point. They didn't play anyone good in their non-conference. Okay, when you look at their wins in conference, like Washington's their best win. They're 6-5. Michigan's 5-5. UCLA has a losing record. The Nebraska Cornhuskers are 500. Michigan State's under 500. Northwestern's under 500. Maryland's under 500. And when they play Purdue, they're 1-9. And so I like Indiana's played and beaten one team so far. Obviously that'll change on Saturday. That has a winning record. They've played one game against a team with a winning record, and it's Washington. And it's not like they're 8-3 or 8-2 right now. They're 6-5. Seriously, like I understand the gripes against Indiana, but like the College Football Playoff Committee has laid out this precedent of no matter what happens to Indiana on Saturday, they should be in. Whether they lose by 10, whether they lose by 7, 3, 100, 54, whatever it is, Indiana should get in either way. Because Penn State is ranked 4th, and their one loss came at home to Ohio State. And they're still the 4th ranked team in the country. It's as if the College Football Playoff Committee didn't even count that game. And if they're going to look at Penn State and deem them the 4th best team in the country, despite that loss to Ohio State, and I know they only lost by 7, but if you watch that game, then you know that Penn State didn't belong on the same field as Ohio State. Like, if they're going to allow them to sit at 4, I just don't know how they plummet Indiana the same way that they did to BYU, right? Who dropped 8 spots after losing to Kansas. It's like, oh, it's Kansas. Yeah, but I mean, I don't know. Notre Dame has that loss to Northern Illinois, and they're still ranked number 6. So no matter what happens on Saturday, like Indiana undoubtedly deserves to be in the top 12. I don't know how far they'll drop them. Like they'll drop them below Notre Dame. I think they drop them below Alabama. They seem to really like Miami. I don't know why. I really don't. But I think that they drop them below them. So I think that if Indiana was to lose to Ohio State, I think they drop them 4 spots, regardless of the score, like regardless of what happens. And so, once again, I'm incredibly intrigued to see how all of this winds up shaking out. Because like there's going to be a couple good teams that are deserving that aren't going to make it. And, this is the issue with expanding the playoff. Like, there wouldn't be very many arguments about who should be in and who shouldn't when it comes to a 14 playoff. Because teams would just look at Texas and they'd be like, oh, they've lost one game. And, like, all of a sudden who you play in those things just don't seem to matter as much. Like, the arguments around the 14 playoff were never this intense, right? Because there are so many different teams now that have a legit argument to be in that top 12, right? Like Ole Miss has an argument. Georgia, Tennessee, SMU, BYU, Texas A&M still has an argument to be ranked that high. BYU does, obviously, as well. And so, whereas beforehand, when we were arguing about like 2 teams for 1 spot, right? Because last year it was like, do you take Alabama or do you take Florida State? It was 2 teams for 1 spot. Now we're arguing Ole Miss, Georgia, Tennessee, SMU, BYU, Texas A&M. 6 teams for like 2 spots or 3 spots maybe. So it's like how do you weigh all these things? And with the history of the College Football Playoff Committee and the way that they've ranked teams, it has consistently been inconsistent. They have judged teams based off of a different criteria every single year. And when the committee does that, you aren't going to make anybody happy, right? And then if you have that inconsistent criteria year in and year out, and then you throw in more teams to be inconsistent about, you're just going to upset more people. Okay, like that's just the way that this was going to work. And I've already read different ideas where they're like, expand it more, make it 14 teams, make it 16. I just think that's a waste of time because, look, like there's a sizable gap between Oregon and SMU, who has a decent chance at getting in. They're ranked 13th. I think there's a sizable gap between Ohio State and BYU. Like if Ohio State had to play BYU, that game wouldn't be close. It wouldn't be, because I've watched both of those teams play and I know what product they put on the field. Like expanding the playoff just makes things harder. It just makes the problem that they currently have even bigger. Like, could you imagine arguing between Texas A&M, Colorado, Clemson, South Carolina, and Army for who deserves those, 13, 14, 15, and 16 spots? That would be impossible. And I know it because we're arguing like crazy right now over the final spots of a 12-team playoff. And so, I don't know. This whole college football expansion thing, I get it. They make more money, but sometimes it's not just about money. Anyway, I'll be back on the air tomorrow from 10 to noon. Tony East of Locked On Pacers, he's going to join me to talk a little bit more about the Pacer struggles. The Dan Dockett Show's loaded up today. John Gruden, Danny Cannell, and I think we got one more guy today, and I'm blanking on who it is. But anyway, like I said, loaded show today. Cannot wait for the Dan Dockett Show, which comes your way here in about 4.5 minutes. I will talk to you tomorrow starting at noon.